Hey guys, welcome to Module 2. First off, I want to thank everybody for all their hard work last week, and I will begin reviewing your discussion board assignments and your short paper in the next couple of days. This week, however, I want to just go over some of the key activities we'll be doing and go over some key concepts that I think you'll need to understand as you work on Module 2 activities. Now, last week we had you focus on the federal court system. This week we're going to be focusing more on state courts. And there's a couple of key resources that I want to make sure you take a look at as you work on this week's assignments. And one of those assignments is our discussion board, which has you looking at your home state judges. And I prefer you do your home state because I think it'd be more beneficial to you. And then you have a short paper this week in which we look at the job qualifications, the duties of state judges versus federal judges. And then I have a short lecture for that. Hopefully I'll get it in this recording. If not, I'll just add it as another one. But for this week, I want to go over some basic concepts associated with the discussion board. And so let me go ahead and disappear here. There we go. So this week in Module 2, when you open the Module 2 State Judicial System and Judges, it has some resources in here. So let's open this up real quick. Here we go. So this is basically going to go over our learning objectives, and I want to focus here on the module reading and resources. And there's two key articles here. One is the difference between federal and state courts, which I think you'll find very beneficial as you work on this week's short paper. And secondly is the National Center for State Courts state court website, which basically lists and breaks down the structure of each of our state courts. And so this will be very beneficial to you as you begin to work on your discussion board assignment for the week. Now, there's a couple key terms that you're going to run across in this week's discussion board assignment. First is the term venue, and second is the term jurisdiction. Now, jurisdiction is the inherent power of a court to hear and decide a case. Okay, that's jurisdiction. So, for example, our scenario for this class is a bank robbery. And bank robbery is a federal crime. It is also a state crime. But the Supremacy Clause, for those of you who recall, gives the federal government sort of the first bite of the apple. And so bank robbery is a federal crime. So the federal government, the federal courts, have jurisdiction over people who commit bank robberies. Now, since our scenario, again, has a bank robbery occurring in it, the crime of bank robbery is a federal crime. And therefore, the appropriate federal court district would have jurisdiction. And we'll talk about venue here in just a second. But that being said, jurisdiction would lie with federal courts. All right. Let's say, for example, you're involved in a civil suit against somebody. And let's say that in your court structure, Court X has jurisdiction over civil cases up to $10,000. And anything above $10,000 is heard by Court Y. So if you're suing somebody for $15,000, Court Y would have jurisdiction, not Court X. Okay? And those are all based on statutes and legislative law within your state as to the level of jurisdiction that each court within your state has. All right, and that's important because that adds to the level of efficiency and effectiveness within the court system. So venue then is a geographic area, the location in which a case may be heard. Now, what does this mean? In our scenario, for example, the bank robbery occurs in Washington, D.C. So, since we've already decided it's a federal crime, the federal court district within Washington, D.C. will have is the appropriate venue, the appropriate location to where this case should be tried, because that is a district court that has jurisdiction over crimes that occur within a specific geographical area. All right. So venue is basically going to be associated with the location of the crime, and that's pretty simple. So those are the key terms: venue and jurisdiction. And so those are the concepts that I think are important. I also highlight that in my announcement, so you can take a look at that. So let's take a real quick look here at the National Center for Courts. And I am going to go down to Idaho just because it's a pretty simple court structure. And so let's take a look at Idaho. So Idaho has basically a four-tiered system. We have Magistrates Division, District Court, Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court for the state of Idaho. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about here. Magistrate Division, these courts have jurisdiction over cases, okay, small claims, exclusive small claims, up to $5,000. So anything over $5,000 will be here in the district courts. So they have jurisdiction for civil claims less than $5,000. So from $1 to $5,000, you would go to the Magistrate Division. Anything above $5,000, you'd have to go to district courts. All right. Now, district courts, for example, have jurisdiction over felony cases. What does this mean? This means that if you're arrested for a felony and you go to court, you will not be tried in Magistrates Division because they do not have jurisdiction. Jurisdiction lies with the district courts in the case of Idaho. So these are how you can apply district court. This is how you can apply jurisdiction within the state courts. All right. So take a look at your home state. Most states are going to have a 3 or 4 tiered system. Some, such as New York, however, are very complicated, and you can take a look at that. And those type of structures may cause some problems when it comes to, the ability of a person to have their case heard locally. What does that mean? Well, in your comment post that you have for, in your initial post also for this week's discussion board, you have to address what issues are likely to arise regarding venue for different criminal and civil cases. And what this means is that if you live in a rural area, all right, so let's say you live in a small town and your small town is serviced by a magistrate court. We'll just use Idaho as an example, okay? So your small town has a magistrate court which has jurisdiction over these type of cases. And so let's say you're suing your neighbor for $15,000. Right? Obviously, the magistrate court, which is in your hometown, does not have jurisdiction. The court that has jurisdiction would be the district court for Idaho. All right? But let's say the district court is located in the county seat, and the county seat is 30 miles away from where you live. That is an example of some of the implications that can arise associated with venue. In other words, in some rural areas, the court that has jurisdiction over a particular subject matter may be 10 miles away, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40, maybe farther, depending on how rural of an area you live. So these type of geography and structures can cause problems. So one of the prompts that you have to address is what issues are likely to arise regarding venue for different criminal and civil cases. And that's going to be the level of jurisdiction that courts have in your particular hometown. Now, if you live in a large urban area, that's probably not going to be a problem. So if you live in Los Angeles, that's not going to be a problem. Okay? But if you live out in Timbuktu, that most certainly could be a real problem for those of you who live in a rural environment. If you've had to experience court or jury duty or something to that effect, you may have had to travel 10, 15, 20 miles to get to the courthouse. Where in some areas, like urban areas such as Los Angeles, you may have only had to travel 5 miles to get to the courthouse, or even less. All right. So those are the key concepts that I want you to pay attention to. Now, one of the things in the discussion board is it says how many levels of appeals are there. Well, in other words, how how many levels of appeals can a case have before it reaches the highest court? And so oftentimes it's either going to be 3. It depends on what type of jurisdiction the district courts have. Sometimes district courts, in example of Idaho, might have the ability to hear appeals from the magistrate division in the state of Idaho. In some cases, it would have to go right up to the Court of Appeals, that type of thing. So realize that in this case, it could be up to 1, 2, 3 steps. And basically, it's just to get you to look at and understand the level of court structure within your state. So when you decide how many appeal levels are there, then you can say there are three appeals levels. First has to go to the district court, then the Court of Appeals, and then finally the Idaho Supreme Court. All right. So those are for cases that deal specifically with the appeals. So understand that the appeal process is going to vary by state depending on how your state is structured. And so you can take a look at the diagrams that are offered throughout our text, throughout this link here. So let's take a look at another state. I like to look at New York, like I said, because it's very, I don't want to say complicated, but for those of you who live in New York, you might be used to it. But here's the structure of New York. So we just looked at Idaho. Look at this one. So you can understand how complicated these cases can be in terms of which court has jurisdiction. So you have civil courts of the City of New York, criminal courts of the City of New York, town and village justice courts, district courts, city courts, court of claims, family courts, surrogate courts, Supreme Courts, county courts, all kinds of courts in New York State. So if you live in New York, this will give you a good opportunity to begin to evaluate your court structure. You might even live in a rural area of New York State in which you're serviced by a town and village justice court, which has limited jurisdiction over these matters. And then obviously if you had to go to another court for, let's say, a civil case or maybe a felony trial, you know, how far away is it? You know, that's one of those things that venue can impact individuals in terms of their ability to have their legal issues resolved. So this is New York State. Again, very complicated, it looks like, but if you live in New York, you can take a look at that. And then I usually like to touch on real briefly California, because California is the most populous state, but you'll find California has a very simplistic type of court structure, considering how large it is. And if you look at California's court structure, it's relatively simple. We have superior courts, Court of Appeals, and a Supreme Court. Okay, Court of Appeals are divided up in California by jurisdiction, by areas, much like the federal government, their Court of Appeals. Each county in California has at least one Superior Court. Probably 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, California had municipal courts and superior courts. Municipal courts were courts of limited jurisdiction, misdemeanor trials, preliminary hearings, civil cases up to so much money. And then about 20, 25 years ago, they merged the two courts into one, so now it's just a superior court. They did that as a means to obviously provide more efficiency and effectiveness to the residents of California. Seems to be working, but for such a large state, there it is. It's very simple. It's a 3-tiered system, all right? So carefully take a look at this. It's a great resource for this week's discussion board assignment. Let me go back here. Again, it is a great resource, so make sure you take a look at it. The differences between state and federal courts is also a good resource for you, so make sure you find time to take a look at that. I will go over this in a little bit more detail in a lecture following this, but I think if you bookmark this page, it'll help you as you progress through some of our other assignments that we have to deal with as we progress through the course. So again, take a look at these resources here in Module 2. I think you're going to find them to be very beneficial to you as you work on your discussion board assignment. So the key terms, again, to understand are venue and jurisdiction. So read my announcement, and hopefully you'll listen to this lecture. If you have any questions regarding those two concepts, please do not hesitate to contact me, okay? So that's the highlight for the discussion board. I'm going to do another short little lecture over the short paper and hopefully that'll help you guys out. All right, have a great week. Talk to you later. Bye.